Okay, it is about 7:02 p.m. and today is Wednesday, October the 27th, 2021. Welcome to week number 4, week 4. The fourth week, which means we're in the second half of the course. I hope you guys are enjoying this course. I'm enjoying it. The topics that we've had to discuss each week have been pretty interesting. And I would hope that more of you would come out and discuss it with me, but I see. So I know this is like an independent studies course. So I guess, and then you already know my style. So most of you, quite honestly, are doing pretty good in the course. So let's just go ahead and get started with this. Share my screen. Comes, and there it is. So let's start by looking at the calendar to remind you of where we are. As you can see, we are right here. Today is the live lecture. Your initial posts were due yesterday. Your reply post is due Saturday. Your written assignment is due Sunday, along with the live classroom phrase. And then, as you can see, this will be it for November. And that next week, we will be in 2 lectures on Wednesday. Make sure you know, 7 o'clock, as we normally would. That'll be our week 5 lecture. And 8:30 to 9:30 will be our second lecture, or for week 6, because as you should know, week 6 ends the 9th. So I wanted to make sure that you have all of the information you need and plenty of time to complete the work for week number 6. Okay. So it absolutely ends on the 9th. Okay. So let's take a look at the announcement for this week. Comparing policing is the topic. We're going to deal with the history of policing, early policing methods, and technology. And then remember to participate in the discussion assignment, community policing, and then your written assignment, crime statistics. Crime statistics, and we'll talk about that written assignment as well. Pay close attention to the rubrics. All right. So let's get right into module 4. Let's deal with the written assignment first, which is crime statistics. So you're going to look at all of this information here. Then you're going to prepare a 2-page paper, 2 double space. It's probably easier to prepare a 2-page paper double space than single space anyway. And remember that the paper describes the city you researched, the statistics you observed, and what measures would you suggest to lower the crime. Be sure you provide APA, which means a cover sheet, a reference page, as well as citations in the body throughout the paper. Make sure you should provide proof of the website that you use to access this information. Okay. It says you can use the following resources for your research, and gives you several places just to make sure that the links are working. Let me double check, make sure they're working as of now. Yep. Okay. So we see that it is working. So you can utilize that. Bridging the gap. Yeah, that's also working. Good. Comstat is origin. And you can um, utilize that. Go down there. And it gives you everything you need to know there. Okay. Uh, uh, Statistics, reporting systems, and methods. This article here will help you out as well. So the links are all working. So I don't want anybody to come tell me the links aren't working. At least they're working here. If you have a problem, check with personal support or probably your computer issue, because if they're working here, we know they're working. Remember, it's APA. All right. Here is the rubric. And you know already that we operate on the column to the left, mastery. That's the only column I teach from. These others are, this is like an A and maybe a B. These are a little different here. But the point of the matter is that when you get here, you're dealing with C, D, and F over here, and you don't want to get there. So for the mastery column, clear and comprehensive description of the city and the location of crime hotspots. Description of crime statistics, clear and comprehensive. Measures to lower, clear and comprehensive. That's the order of the day. It's pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. And you add all that together for your points, along with the fact that you've got to have credible sources. If you don't have APA format, you're going to end up losing points, and you're going to end up over here, and you don't want to do that. Okay. I'll keep on moving because there's nobody to ask me questions. So it's pretty clear what you need to do. Community policing. And so for that, you're going to go to the Salt Lake City Police Department website and click on community engagement, and then choose one of the programs. And a post of at least 250 words describe the philosophy of the programs. Okay. My responses to you generally relate to other programs that can be included also. Okay. So make sure you complete that initial post due Tuesday night. Reply post due Saturday. So we're going to talk about these three topics: policing history, early policing, and then conclude dealing with technology. So the philosophy on policing is pretty straightforward. You had the beat cop, the person who was present in the community. The people in the community knew them, and they had relationship with most of the people in the community, and they worked just hand in hand with the members of the community to help them, and they had strong relationships. But then in the 20s, the patrol car became popular, and the beat cop became fewer and far between. And what would happen is that the patrol cars would roll through the neighborhood, and it kind of interfered with the personal connection because when you're walking, you talk to somebody. With the beat car, you just drove through and you observed. And as a result of that, cutting off the interpersonal relationships that existed between the police uh, before uh, that, there was a lack of trust because police only showed up when there were problems. So kind of like before, it didn't have to be a problem. It's most interesting that we're trying to get back to that where police um, can also participate in community um, connections. And they're kind of wanting to get back to that, which makes a whole lot of sense because we have reached a stage now where one of the issues that face policing today is lack of trust. And so it talks about here in the 80s and 90s, in response to the rising crime rate, police departments revisit the idea of foot patrols, especially in high crime areas, and to try to get more trust back to the police department. And it is important that crimes are solved not just by good police work, but also by good community participation. There are community watch groups that exist that work in conjunction with the police in the communities. And like I said, bringing back the beat officer um, so that people will know who they are. It talks about at community functions and programs. I referred to a program in the discussion post, the DARE program, where the police officer would come to the schools and talk to the kids. My daughter, when she's in middle school now, but when she was in elementary school, the DARE officer would come and talk to the kids about the dangers of drugs and so forth. And so my daughter, it's funny, um, we had an incident at the house where someone accidentally dialed 911, and the police officer that came, my daughter happened to see her. She says, "Oh, I know her. She's an officer that came to the DARE group." But so, in other words, what you did was preparing your children to look at the police officer as your friend. When I was coming up as a kid, there was this thing called officer friendly, and some of you probably are too young to know about that. And officer friendly was an attempt to deal with um, community policing and to do the same thing that the DARE program did. So, um, and during those times, you didn't have to have a problem to meet the police. It's the most interesting. I like to see situations when the police will come by in their squad car and they'll see the kids doing something like maybe even a few of them jumping rope or either playing hopscotch or either um, playing basketball, as some communities, they have them the hoop in the street in the neighborhood, and the police would get out of their squad cars, or either they would go on the playground and they would get out and they would shoot baskets with the kids, and that developed a connection between the kids. The point of the matter is to humanize the police, to again, um, recreate what happened in the early 20s with this position of trust that is so dearly needed. Uh, so we learned from the history that that the police operated very early, as it says, as first first century, as they talk about going back to Rome, um, from what they call a Praetorian Guard that protected the palace. And then there were a group assigned to go through the streets. Well, in England, this is when we start getting into the introduction to modern police. A person by the name of Sir Robert Peel dealt with what we might call, some of us call the Bobbies, the London Metropolitan Police. And the idea was to create an environment where the police was connected to the community, like we had talked about earlier. And um, actually, those early police did not carry guns. They did not carry weapons like that. Um, so their role was to prevent crime and disorder and maintain a positive relationship with citizens. And they were impartial and unbiased. Use of physical force only to the extent necessary to restore order, as the law should be anyway, and it is today. And recognize that police is efficiency is a prerequisite to maintaining order. So then moving ahead to the 18th century, riots and other things started happening, and the police started getting ready to deal with those kind of things, and the political aspects of being a police officer, in which, as it says in 1904, August Vollmer professionalized policing by having, for the first time, training standards, the use of intelligence, psychiatric, and neurological testing to determine how to select recruits who would be better fit. And that was kind of heading in the right direction. But then came the 60s and the 70s, and the social problems involving police dealing with racial inequality, riots, campus disorder, and the Vietnam War contributed to mistrust of the police. So the police were always the bad guys. Um, and in Chicago, on the side of the police cars, they had written, "We serve and protect." And we used to oftentimes jokingly say, but because of the way that they operated, we'd say they serve and protect not the interests of the community, but their own interests. And so it was, as they say, the people of the community versus the police, or us against them, or as the Panthers used to refer to them as the pigs, and that they were the enemy, and that their idea was to create not a solution to the problem, but to add to it oftentimes. And with the racial disparity in terms of the existence of the police departments, fewer minorities, women, and individuals, especially working in the urban areas where there are high population of African Americans and Hispanics, there was a disparity in terms of arresting individuals, and there were things like racial profiling that take place because you were presumed based on your skin color or ethnicity to be someone who would probably be more likely than not to commit a crime, even how you were even dressed. And so the police were caught in the middle of dealing with those things. I remember myself when I think I was 19 when this happened, or 17. Anyway, it was the um, let's see, it was the political campaign that was taking place in Chicago, and we had Mayor Daley, not the son, but the father as the mayor, or the mayor as we called him. And they had the Democratic convention at what existed then that was called the amphitheater. And during that time, there was a riot that took place, or demonstration that took place in Grant Park, which was a park on the lakefront, which was right there by the Buckingham Fountain, and also in front of where I went to college later, Roosevelt University. And you saw the police physically assaulting individuals who were protesting the Vietnam War at that particular time. And uh, it, 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 it led to a series of major problems. And so now in the 80s and the 90s, we have incidents like the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. I'm not talking about when the 2001. I'm not talking about that one. And then the Oklahoma City bombing in Oklahoma City, and we had all of these different issues. And so as a result, um, computers being brought in, there were methods utilizing ComStat, which you study about as you prepare your written assignments, um, um, dealing with problem solving known as community policing. And so with this technological advances, they could mathematically identify what areas had the most crime and what we called crime hotspots. And there were aggressive inclusion in these communities. Now, one of the problems that continued to happen, as I already said, is that there was a disparity in the police department in terms of race. At this time, there were many issues brought about that there were not as many minority police officers. I know we had that major problem in Chicago, and there were other cities across the country. And that you didn't have commanders and leaders that came. I think, if I recall correctly, the very first commander in Chicago who was an African American, I believe it was Fred Rice. I think that was his name. I think it was Fred because Fred went to college with me, but I believe he was one of the first ones. There were several after that. Superintendent Hillard, Superintendent Martin, Superintendent Hillard, and then we had recently, I forgot the police chief that was taken down, but now we have an African American police chief. But the point of the matter is, I'm saying is that there were some very serious issues that were taking place where it was brought to the attention of many people that the people who were policing the area didn't connect very well with the people in the community because there were not enough people who looked like or could relate to the lifestyle of individuals, such as police officers who, as I had some family members who in CPD who grew up in the hood, and they went to get more education. And then also what happened is that police officers began to become police officers more professionally. Uh, I have a classmate who went to high school with me. Right after high school, I think he started at CPD. But anyway, now pretty much most police officers have some college, either associates or either now moving up into bachelor's degree. For example, the state police, you can't become a state police officer in Illinois and in most jurisdictions without at least having a bachelor's degree. So more educated, and so the key thing is, but Now we begin to deal with the ethical issues as you discover, looking at what has happened across the country with the police departments and individuals such as George Floyd, Orlando Castile, Dante Wright, um, um, let's see, uh, George Scott, was it George Scott? Walter Scott, um, and other individuals such as Trayvon Martin. Well, Trayvon really wasn't exactly a police officer, but it was a watch group, that George Zimmerman was involved with. But going across the country, dealing with what happened in Dallas, um, Texas, where the black guy was killed, Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, and the list goes on and on and on. So anyway, the dealing with the present time, it says the new millennium saw terrorist attacks, which September 11th brought to attention changes and to all levels of law enforcement. And so now the police operate differently, um, um, proactive, and no longer simply to enforce the law. Today, though, officers are being taught to be social workers and deal with other issues. And as I said, to be less reactive. Uh, Policing includes officers who are, as I say, who are college educated, conscious of the communities, and more responsible, tech savvy. That's one of the critical things, and we'll talk about that at the end of this lecture today. So the key thing is dealing with diverse communities. I talk about that in our transferable skills. The fact that you will work with people from various cultures, various backgrounds, races, sexual preferences, and things that have happened. But there are a number of things that have created a difference in how law enforcement is approached based upon technology. Just to throw out a few, the cameras, the body cams, and these things right here. Almost everybody has cell phones now that now have cameras in them. So anyway, there's a difference in how police work. You're more under observation than before. So early policing methods, we've kind of talked about that. And going back, to what we had talked about earlier, we're not going to go back over that. But there was, as they say in the 20s and 30s, citizens, police had a negative relationship to develop, and I explained that. And so gangsters came about, such as Al Capone. And this brought in J. Edgar Hoover, who started the FBI, who, by the way, was a devout racist. I've shared before that my dream and desire was to become an FBI agent on my way to becoming a lawyer. And so I applied to the FBI when I was in high school, and they conducted a thorough investigation of his background, knowing the things I had gone through in life, but finding that I was pretty clean. However, I was summarily dismissed, and there was a person I knew who's Caucasian. He got in. Well, years later, the FBI wrote a letter that they sent out to people like me, and they found me and sent me the letter, and apologizing for the actions of J. Edgar Hoover, who they discovered was a staunch sexist and racist, and that he was summarily dealing with the issues of rejecting police. I mean, African Americans, Hispanics, and women from the FBI. But I decided not to go that way. Though I have several friends who are African American who grew up and climbed to the ranks pretty high in the Federal Bureau of Investigation and other areas uh, as well. So now moving forward to the 40s and 50s, as they say, crime was decreased because the family structure was normally intact. People, looked out for each other, and dealing with public safety, and said in large cities, though, like the ones I grew up in, Chicago, policing remained relatively to, as you say, to the quality issues of dealing with drunkenness and theft. And then um, it became more reactive because police were visible on foot patrol and residents. I remember coming up again, starting to see police officers, even when I was a little kid. But we don't have that anymore. In the 60s, as we talked about earlier, the unrest of civil rights and the Vietnam War protests, um, distrust came um, with the police. Okay. And so then we began to move towards modern policing. So we began to have technology come in, and says we no longer have institutions that house the mentally ill, meaning those populations would end up in the street and commit crimes. I've already said before that there are many people who commit crimes in the streets who are alcoholics or drug addicts, but primarily drug addicts, and or mentally ill, and they commit crimes to support their habits, and that thus brings more work for the police. And police have a dilemma of how to deal with uh, stops where a person is apparently mentally ill and they're not trained to be able to deal with those individuals. And unfortunately, there's some excessive force issues that result from the police not properly being trained. So police today need to deal with training in the mentally ill area and utilize the computers and other forms of technology, cameras, and modern policing means that you're going to be a social worker. You're going to help people in all areas from homelessness to addictions to mental disorder. And one of the things that has happened more, and it didn't happen when I was in school, are these mass shootings in the schools. It just didn't happen. And so it's a issue that is very important. And then, as I said earlier, dealing with diverse populations from various cultures and ethnicities, it is important that the police department uh, reflect some form of looking like the community. This young man here, African American police officer, as I was coming up as a kid, I hardly ever saw that. Hardly ever. I don't ever remember much seeing it in Chicago. I remember when I first started seeing black police officers, it was like, wow. But the fact of the matter is that there was then what we call tokenism, where there were not, um, there was not the number of minorities on the force that was commensurate with the communities that the agencies were serving. So the problem too is that there's money issues, being able to finance um, the police and so forth. There's always challenges. And now, in addition to what I'm going to talk about now, we're dealing with an issue of the COVID-19 uh, and the individuals not wanting to take the vaccine, even though many police officers have died as a result of COVID-19. In fact, in some communities, some cities across the country, there are more police who've died from COVID-19 than from gunshots or any other things of that nature. So it's an issue that unfortunately the unions are using. So, and again, instead of turning uh, uh, the the vaccine into a health debate, into a political debate, and it's problematic. It's just problematic. So back to what we have here. Um, it says, as we compare and contrast early policing changes since the 1800s, there's uh, uh, we've gone from 2 officers in a car to 1, from foot patrol to patrol car, and now back to foot patrol, walking the beat to try to deal with community policing. That was what I said earlier. And then uh, we now have the assistance of technology and computer dispatch, and as I talked about ComStat earlier, to deal with uh, hotspots in the area where statistics are provided to show you where your areas of crime are pretty prevalent. And so there is some form of what we call predictive policing, smart policing, and evidence-based policing. The only thing I don't like about the predictive policing is that it, if you don't be very careful about how you apply it, you can apply it in a disparate form and presume that because a person is of a certain ethnic group. I had a Caucasian police officer to tell me, not just me, but I attend every year a seminar that takes place every year that's sponsored by these guys here, the Illinois Chiefs of Police, uh, and their association. And at one of the seminars, this was a couple years ago, um, we were in a section about the NAACP and community policing and dealing with minorities. And a police officer that turned out to be from my neighborhood, where I was living at that time, um, explained that he was afraid of African American males because they were violent. And he based that upon uh, movies, TV shows, and things of that nature. And that his work in the community was such that he carried that over because it became a part of him. Well, in that very same neighborhood where he was a police officer, um, it turned out that I was stopped by the police because I was jogging in the neighborhood with my hat backwards. And I'm talking about something that happened about 2015. So it hasn't been like years and years and years ago. And it's a very nice neighborhood. And the police officer, I had noticed it was going in another direction. And then the next thing I know, he had apparently made a U-turn and pulled up alongside where I was running and asked me to stop. Well, I stopped. I don't run with headphones on or listen to my music and stuff like that. So um, imagine if I was, uh, what could have happened? But here's what he did. He had me to stop and come over, and he says, "I don't know you. Um, why are you? What are you doing around here?" I looked at him and I was really upset. I was extremely disturbed. I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I don't know you." I says, "You know most of the people around here?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Do you see my shirt?" And I had on a t-shirt, not necessarily this one because I got this one later. It said Northwestern Law. So I said, "You see my shirt?" He says, "Yeah, where'd you get it?" Now he asked me, where did I get it? I said, from my law school. So he says, and he had a shocked look on his face, like, you're a lawyer? First of all, he didn't know I was old as I was, because even now people can't tell. But the point of the matter is that he insulted me terribly there. And I went to his chief and I told the chief, and the chief kind of like, well, wasn't getting anything from the chief either. The point of the matter is that I told him where I lived and showed him, actually, if you go around the corner of the house, he said judges and lawyers live up in there. I said, yeah, I know, I'm one of them. I'm not a judge. But I'm trying to show you guys to a point that you understand, and some of you might be able to understand what I'm talking about. And it's not playing the race card, but it was thrown at me. And so anyway, the bottom line is that police have to understand, and not necessarily in their so-called predictive policing, that because you see an African American or either a person running with their hat backwards, then there's a problem. My son's 26 years old is one, and the other one now is 21. They weren't as old, but they've always been pretty tall young men. Were on their way around the corner to the gas station to get a soda or something, and they got stopped by the police and called me, and I came up. This is unacceptable. And so in terms of dealing with policing, it is important for law enforcement to be able to deal with diverse communities and be trained in sensitivity training and to understand the various ways that people communicate. So moving right along from there, we have computers in patrol cars. We have the breathalyzers. We have the GPS locators, which we can use for where shots are fired. Cameras everywhere, video camera, with the lights on the streets, on the cars, and now body cams and things of that nature. So technology is helping law enforcement to deal with crime. We now have also SWAT teams and canine dogs to sniff out bombs, drugs, bodies, and work with various agencies. I participated when I was a police officer in drug raids, and we also had, of course, traffic stops that we would block the streets off, not just for license and registration, but we found other things that were taking place. And so there's a whole lot of things. And then as I've said before, cameras are actually good for law enforcement because it protects not just the public, but also the officers themselves. So hopefully we are heading in the right direction. And as it concludes here with this bold print, to build a positive rapport with the community, to gain the cooperation and trust of residents served by the police department, we hope that the modern policing will accomplish those goals. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the last section, which is dealing with technology, and we've kind of pretty much covered it. But be aware that there's, as we talk about proactive policing, and that's using ComStat and supervisors of police to deploy officers strategically where in some communities there's a need for more police than in others. The key thing is that we don't want to be at the point where the police are looked at as the Gestapo, or to look at the police as if they were the militia. So, but the technology has helped with officer accountability and safety, and utilize, of course, to clearly demonstrate when there is excessive force that may take place when a police officer, i.e., the Derek Chauvin case that involved the murder of George Floyd, and also Laquan McDonald here in Chicago, where 16 shots were fired, and the body cam, or rather the dash cam, um, actually said that what the police said in his reports was not accurate, and he was subsequently found guilty of second-degree murder. So, okay, we got technology. Um, as some people feel that the police feel like they're under on the spotlight. Well, that's okay, and that it's important for you to understand why would you be concerned about whether you're on camera in a public area. It says that some police consider privacy violations. No, cameras um, provide a way to make sure that the police are doing what they're supposed to do. And if you are doing something wrong, no, you don't want to be on camera. But as it says here, it says cameras only serve to enhance community policing motives with residents. That's what it says. While neglecting to address that, there are still social ills that need to be addressed. So cameras operate on the basis of how police officers perform. But you got to remember one thing, as I would teach my individuals, that when I was teaching this class, written and oral communication, I would tell my students as future law enforcement officers to respect individuals that you come into contact with in your everyday duties, and that you should operate almost like Sergeant Friday. If those of you who are familiar with Dragnet, in the 50s there was a TV show, and then they did a movie, I believe it was in the 80s, where Dan Aykroyd and what's his name? The same guy who played Forrest Gump, you know who I'm talking about, was in the movie. And Dan Aykroyd was like Joe Friday, very polite to criminals, and functioned and did the job pretty well. So since you now have the help of technology, you can do things like check plates pretty easily, check licenses much easier, and as it talks about, it says a device that sits on the hood of the police car and automatically scans all vehicles and loads the numbers into a database. If the car is unregistered or stolen, the information comes up immediately. So there's a way to resolve those kinds of things. So, so the data collection comes about and is used to identify offenders. Though some people argue that surveillance technology can be linked to multiple databases, including information on individuals, vehicles, crimes, and locations, could anticipate that they would have broader application than just the recovery of motor vehicles, and that using the reader can identify crime patterns and assist in investigation of crime. That's a good thing. But some people think that it's used to type them. But all in all, with the modern policing and the attitudes that I've talked about throughout this lecture, with technology in hand, if utilized in the proper fashion, it can benefit um, the public. And like I said again, there must be a happy medium between the community being able to get back to what was started out in the 20s, and that is for the police to be trusted. That's going to be the solution to our problem. Okay, well, that's it for today. I'm going to um, adjourn, but before I adjourn, I'm going to give you the key phrase. If it looks up, like sometimes I'm looking up, then what I'm really doing is looking at the monitor in front of me, and because my camera is below, so it always looks like I'm looking up, but I'm not looking in the ceiling. And there's no monitor on the wall. It's just sitting right here on my desk. Community policing. That's it. Give me community policing for your points. That's it for tonight. See you next week. Remember, we will have 2 lectures next week. One at 7 o'clock p.m. Central. Try to come out. And 8:30 p.m. Will be week 6. So I will see you guys then. Stay safe and enjoy your week. Get those assignments in as well. Good night.